Hi, I'm Sarah Mead.
I'm Michelle Maloney.
I'm Sarah Carroll.
I'm Shelby Rose.
I'm Ray Miller.
So, for question one, how is blaming the victim policy impacted groups explored in this module? I wanted to start off by talking about what victim blaming is. It's when the victim of a crime or any wrongful act is held entirely or partially at fault. And what I found really interesting was even in some of the cases that we've read about, it doesn't mean that they're at fault. Whereas when I think about the Hall article, and a quote I pulled was, "Beyond the influences of political authority, blaming the victim laws propagate among Black families increasing rates of poor health, educational failure, and contact with the criminal justice system, which has spiraled out of control. Thus, the perception of Black families falls far short of their actual ability to benefit the Black community and society at large." To me, some of those things are impacting them and kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy and setting them up for failure, whereas they might not be a victim of a crime, but they're a victim of circumstance. And another quote I pulled was, according to Ryan, the primary cause of social problems is the powerlessness, and the cure for powerlessness is power, which must be redistributed via income. And this has particular implications for Black males, and that was something that again is out of their control, but it's a way that that victim blaming is creating an endless cycle.
Another thing that we pulled was from the Discret article. They talk about at the end of it some things that they chose to include and why. One was that they refrained from using the term colorblindness, and the direct quote says it equates not seeing with not knowing. So in other words, the phrase colorblindness means that the lack of the vision comes to ignorance. So as leaders, making sure that we're not shying away from the differences in students, but accepting and setting the examples for others to follow. Being colorblind doesn't necessarily solve the issue. It just is under the rug and ignoring those underlying issues, such as this victim blaming, as we just described.
And so building on what Michelle is saying about, sort of the ways this manifests in school, one of the things from the Discret article that stood out to me is a quote where they say, "The authors recognize how compliance is conflated with goodness and how goodness in turn perpetuates the concept of smartness for some children. Additionally, the authors recognize how white complicity is subtly groomed into the white body, including how children are taught from a young age to rationalize the inequitable distribution of property based on skin color." So we're bringing children up in a system where everything around them is reinforcing the idea that the people who are victims of oppressive systems have earned their place there, that is what they deserve and what they belong, that is their own moral failings. So then, it's no wonder that we sort of get away with things like what the authors later say about telling stories in a way that glosses over multiplicity. And so falling into that trap that Chimamanda Adichie notes about the danger of a single story. And then also, in terms of the school and the school's responses to this, which I won't say too much about because Shelby and Ray are going to address that. The Lug article, I thought, stated it really well when they say neither our Constitution nor our governmental institutions that are bound by constitutional strictures are colorblind, nor are they classless, gender neutral, and so forth. And so we have a lot of work to do as teachers in our classrooms and as administrators in schools to sort of counteract the fact that these systems are built with particular people in mind and that they consolidate resources in the hands of a few.
So going off of what Sarah said and just some things or ways that school leaders can respond from within the empirical articles, the blaming the victim article talked about, by literal definition, traditional schools of thought suggest that technological competence means the capacity to execute a particular task. This simple definition becomes obsolete when applied in the absence of evidence-based policymaking. Furthermore, evidence-based policymaking enables technological competence because the variations in tasks are made more intelligible with different policies. So we talked about ways that school leaders can ensure that competence is being assessed fairly or equitably by differentiating assessment options. For example, many standardized tests are now given electronically, which again is not necessarily testing content competence, but instead that technological competence that the article spoke about. Another one that we found in the Discrit article said that I found this absence even more troubling given the centrality of students of color and entrenched inequities in education. For example, the overrepresentation of students of color and in special education, the achievement gap, and the school to prison pipeline. So it's kind of our obligation as school leaders to ensure that students of color are being referred to those special education classes, or watching that achievement gap, so that we know that they're there for the correct reasons, not simply because of their race. And we're taking into account the demographic of a school before the state gets upset with how many students are in special education or that we're not providing those resources.
To wrap up our group's conversation, we found a quote: most authors use person first language, such as a student with a disability or a student of color, to emphasize the individual over the disability. At the same time, authors sometimes use disabled people to emphasize disabled as a valued identity, as well as to show how people are actively enabled by society's commitment to thyself and psychological barriers. This latter can be used as both a verb and an adjective. Just kind of going off from that, I think it's important as a school leader to be mindful of how we're speaking to others, and again, to stress that importance to our students, and to correct them if we're walking down the hall and we hear something like that being said.